recognized symbol of excellence in sports entertainment.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of That Was Extreme, right here on adfreeshows.com. I'm Josh Shernoff from So Says Shernoff on Fight, your one-stop shop for satirical wrestling news. And as always, I am joined by the quintessential stud muffin and host of the 69-minute Eargasm podcast, Mr. Joel Gertner, the leader of the BWO, and my co-host every Monday morning on the Mind of the Meanie podcast, the Blue Meanie. Gentlemen, today we have got a fun one, but before we get to it, how are you?
I am amazingly upright. No, seriously, I'm excited to be here for number 3. Thank you again for Ad Free Shows for having us.
And I am surprisingly horizontal. You'd never know that because I've got my phone mounted on the ceiling. And don't ask about why that is. Because I'll tell you. And then we'll lose the contract.
There we go. No, it's great to be here. Episode 3. You know, the first 2 were a huge success. The feedback that we received from everybody at Ad Free Shows has been awesome, and we're just going to keep it going. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. So let's talk a little bit about why we're here. Today, we're going to take a look back at one of my all-time favorites in ECW, the Human Suplex Machine, Taz. Taz was born Peter Senercha, October 11th, 1967 in Brooklyn, New York. He played high school football and studied judo, reaching a second-degree black belt. He's married, and together he and his wife have one son, Tyler, who is currently training with Cody Rhodes to be a professional wrestler under the ring name Hook, and has already made his appearances in AEW as part of his father's stable, Team Taz. Going back in time to the very beginning, Taz trained under Johnny Rodz and began wrestling in World Wrestling Council, WWC, making his professional wrestling debut on June 3rd, 1987 in San Juan, Puerto Rico. He wrestled as Kid Crush before moving on to the name the Tazmaniac, which he would use variations of course, for the rest of his career. Johnny Rodz, before we talk about Taz, Johnny Rodz is a name that comes up every so often, but not as much as maybe it should. Some might even be surprised to know that he is an early class WWE Hall of Famer. Can you guys tell us some about Johnny Rodz, maybe some of our younger viewers and listeners who aren't familiar with him? And did either of you ever cross paths with him? Joel, let's start with you.
Johnny Rodz' name comes up a little bit more around me, and probably not only, but perhaps significantly geographically, because I live in Brooklyn. I'm from Brooklyn. I was born in Brooklyn. And Gleason's Gym, where Johnny Rodz trains people and has his wrestling school, is in another part of Brooklyn. So he's one of the closest wrestling school trainers to me. I actually went to college with his daughter. And he lived near my grandparents as well. So Johnny Rodz, I'm a little bit familiar with. Have been to Gleason's Gym, have sat down with him in preparation for promoting one of my MXW shows, and was talking to him about I was looking at Hazleton, PA as a market. And at the time he knew of somebody that was promoting there, and he kind of knew the area, knew the market. And at the time said, you know, you're right here in the biggest city you're in New York City. You've got your other markets that you're doing, Connecticut, Albany. He said, don't do Hazleton. I wouldn't do it. But I talked with him about renting a ring, perhaps renting his promoter's license. But all that is nothing compared to his time in the business, where he was legendary worldwide and within the U.S., here in the Northeast with the WWF and the WWF as the unpredictable Johnny Rodz. Little bit of kind of almost like a heel SD Jones, where he was a job guy, but a king job guy, a kind of high undercard, low mid card, kind of an underneath guy, a good hand, a gatekeeper, a guy who you'd have to get past, and as a shoot, a guy who if the office had interest in seeing if they could push a guy, a superstar, a potential superstar, and work with them, they would have him get in the ring with Johnny Rods, and after the match, they would go to Johnny and ask Johnny, "Is this person worthy?" That kind of thing. He worked in California at the time when Piper was there, like in the, I think, late 70s. He worked in California not as Johnny Rods, but as Java Rook, and actually got a bit of a push out there in the California territory, and had a presence in Puerto Rico, and just was a very, very seasoned. Gosh, I'd say he may have started in the 60s, so 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 1, 2. This, I mean, he is, I think, 70 years old, but this also could be maybe his seventh, maybe his sixth decade in the business. Just a huge presence.
Wow.
And then when you think about all of the people that he's trained that came out of the New York City area or the Northeast, I mean, he half of the IWCCW roster at one point, and a lot of those guys like Taz and Tommy Dreamer. You're talking about a lot of guys that went on to big things.
Meanie, Joel, that was a great lesson on Johnny Rods. Meanie, anything you want to add? And have you ever had any interactions with him?
Other than a random crossing of the paths at like a convention or anything like that, I only knew Johnny Rods as, from my time as being a fan. He was always one of the staples of WWF or WWF TV growing up when I was a kid. And he's one of those characters, you would have your typical job guy, so to speak, but Johnny Rods always had a character. He was a character. And there was something about him that, he always seemed like he would have a chance in the match. And he was one of the few guys, that, did TV jobs, but he was the unpredictable Johnny Rods. And you didn't really hear much of, folks back then doing TV jobs having the monikers like that. So just to see him week in and week out, I became familiarized with him. Big fan of his work, even more so now, once I got into the business and underappreciating his mechanics and everything he did in the ring to make other guys look good. But like Joel said, he was the ultimate journeyman. He started off in California, then came to WWF, and we've come to know and love him as not only as a wrestler but as a trainer. Joel and I having to work with some of his trainees when I was at Al Snow School in Lima, Ohio back in '94. One of his students, a guy named Vinny Magnetti, wrestled as the Shark Attack Kid, came out to Al Snow's gym just to try, put on a new coat of paint. He had trained with Johnny Rods for a little bit, but he figured he can't hurt to learn from more than one person.
Sure.
And the stuff he showed me that Johnny taught him, we would always go back, go through what Al taught us, but then he would show us stuff that Johnny taught him. And it was really cool. It was really cool to mesh the two styles. And so later on in ECW, I know we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Shark Attack Kid Vinny Magnetti wound up having a match in ECW at the Elks Lodge, Lost Battalion Hall in Queens, New York. And that was like a cool meeting of my two worlds, because here's Shark Attack Kid Vinny Magnetti, who I trained with at Al Snow's, and he's in the ring with a former student, co-student in Taz, and they had a match on ECW TV. So I that's as close as I got to being knowing Johnny Rods as a trainer, was cross training with Vinny, and then later on going on to ECW and watching him wrestle with Taz and ECW.
So from ECW to WWC, World Wrestling Council. I mentioned that Taz debuted there. I found it interesting when I discovered that Taz, according to my notes at least, debuted for WWC. What can you guys tell us about that promotion? And do you think cutting his teeth in a place like WWC would prepare him for ECW? Meanie, you want to start there?
Sure. WWC is in some ways a little bit like ECW. from my outside perspective, was a little bit of a blood and guts promotion. ECW was known as a blood and guts promotion, but we also had our great wrestling. But WWC is a legendary promotion, and if Taz, if you're according to your notes, he debuted there for WWC. It makes a lot of sense because when I was training with Al, he got me a lot of bookings in the local area, but he told me go off and learn that spread your wings and work elsewhere. So the work in Puerto Rico in front of that crowd with that audience is a great learning experience where Puerto Rico was like an old school wrestling territory where the heels are in one locker room, baby faces in another locker room, and basically those matches were called in the ring, as opposed to if he had to debut here in America where stuff was called in the ring, but more likely you can talk it out in the locker room. So for him to go down to Puerto Rico and debut, it's probably a great move for him. It's a good way to cut your teeth and learn a different style of wrestling right off the bat. And because if you can work that style where you're meeting in the ring and caught in the ring, and you don't even meet your opponent until you get into the ring, it's quite an experience.
Yeah, Joel, what do you know about that promotion? Or no, not what do you know? Of course you know about that promotion, but what do you remember about it?
It's a perfect setup for ECW as far Caribbean wrestling and Puerto Rican wrestling. In this case, namely WWC. It's psychology wise, it's a little bit of maybe a Southern wrestling territory like Memphis or Smoky, combined mainly with a lot of All Japan strong style and a lot of ECW hardcore. So they loved their Abdullah the Butcher. They loved their Bruiser Brody. They loved, pissing into their beer cup and tossing it at the Rudos. And they loved throwing batteries at the ring. And I mean, it's a good way to know, if you ever could know, that ECW would one day exist and that you'd be needed as a top guy there. And even more so for a young wrestler, for it being their first bookings, it's a great way to see that it's not all glitz and glamour. And Puerto Rico's a great way to find out whether you even want to continue in the wrestling business or not.
Very well said. In the early 1990s, as the Tasmaniac, he wrestled for IWCCW. It's International World Class Championship Wrestling. And he held its light heavyweight championship for 6 months in 91. He would follow Tony Rumble in leaving IWCCW to join the newly established Century Wrestling Alliance. That was CWA. He would also tour in New Japan, and he had his first World Wrestling Federation match on August 19th, 1991 as the Tasmaniac when he was defeated by Ray Odyssey. That's a name that I haven't heard in a while, but I remember seeing Ray Odyssey at local indie shows in the 90s. I guess the early 90s, really. Any Ray Odyssey stories from either of you?
I'm very familiar with Ray, as we're friends on social media now. But as a fan, I was a huge fan of Ray Odyssey. I also knew him from IWCCW, which when it first came out was IWC.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
ICW, yep.
ICW with the Savoldis.
Yep.
That's where I saw Surfer Ray Odyssey. Surfer Ray Odyssey, a product of the Monster Factory in Paulsboro, New Jersey. A classmate of Bam Bam Bigelow. And there seemed to be he was like the first of 3 surfer gimmicks that I knew in the wrestling business, between Surfer Ray Odyssey, Wildman Stevie Ray, and then the Sandman. Yow. Yeah, but one of the 3, they should have been a 6-man tag. Who could have booked it? But yeah, Ray Odyssey, definitely a great talent. Definitely did a lot of the cruiserweight stuff well before it had the name of cruiserweight style. Definitely a unique character, and definitely a staple of the Northeast independent scene.
Joel, did you know him?
I didn't know him personally. I may have worked with him once, maybe twice. Didn't really know him personally. But Meanie nailed it. Yeah. Ray Odyssey, one of the top guys on the Northeast indie scene, had just really good work behind them. Just one of those guys. And honestly, that could have been a tryout match, maybe not for Taz, because in August '91, Taz, it could have been for Taz as well.
Right.
But if you told me that it was only a match that was attempted to give a look to the office for one of the two guys, I would say it was that they were using Taz because him and Ray Odyssey had worked a ton around that time in '91 on IWCCW stuff, so that they could get Ray Odyssey's best match out of him with an opponent like Taz, because Ray Odyssey at the time, I think, maybe had, in August '91, it's tough to say, but it's possible that Ray Odyssey had a few more eyes on him, a bit more steam, and I think certainly a little more experience.
So not too long after Taz had that match with WWF, which we don't know, maybe it was a tryout, maybe it was just he's local talent working the match, like you're suggesting, Joel. Taz made his only appearance ever in World Championship Wrestling, WCW, when he defeated Joey Maggs in a dark match at a Saturday night taping in Atlanta, Georgia on February 8th, 1993. He would then make his second appearance in the WWF on May 5th, 1993, wrestling in a dark match at a Wrestling Challenge taping in Portland, and then the Tasmaniac. There, he would actually face Scott Taylor, which is kind of cool. He would go on to make two additional appearances on house shows in New Jersey, one on June 29th and one June 30th, losing to Jim Powers on both outings. Meanie, you mentioned to me off air that you saw Taz in one of these early dark matches, or I'm sorry, not dark matches, house show matches. And it was, in fact, you looked into it, correct? It was, I believe, the match on the 30th against Jim Powers.
Yeah, I was a youngster in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I had the ironic part about this show was not only was it it was in the Atlantic City Convention Hall, home of WrestleMania 4 and 5, but it was in an annex off the main building that we knew from WrestleMania 4 and 5. Ironically, this is where I first saw my first two wrestling shows ever in my life with my grandfather. And then later on, I would go on to graduate from high school in this very same hall.
Oh, wow.
So this is like a month after I graduated high school in the very same room. I go to watch this WWE house show, and a very young Tasmaniac comes out and wrestles Jim Powers. And Taz's big move at the time was missing I don't want to call it a swanton, but like a flip bump off the top rope where Jim Powers got out of the way and took advantage for the 1, 2, 3. And also during the course of that show, our good friend Bill Apter was ringside taking photographs. And I made a point to try to have a conversation with him during the main event. He was like, "Hey, I'm trying to take photos here." I'm like, "Oh, sorry."
He'll meet you for ice cream after.
Well, when in Rome, when in Atlantic City, right next door. But I was very interesting to see Taz on a WWE show or WWF show, because I was very familiar with Taz from IWC, the Savoldi's promotion, where he was in the tag. Prior to this, he was in a tag team called the Tasmaniacs, where him and I want to say his cousin, or him and his brother were in a tag team, the Tasmaniacs, and the brother in the tag team was Chris Chetty's dad.
I believe from my notes, I saw it that it was actually it was Joe Chetty.
Joe Chetty.
And according to what I found online, he was the nephew, which would make him Chris Chetty's brother. He was Taz's nephew. I don't know if that's true or not. But regardless, yeah, Joe Chetty. That's who it was.
Well, Joe Chetty went on to also become a really good amateur wrestling coach. He coached Chris as well, and which is ironic because later on Taz would go on to train Chetty. But I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves. But
Yeah.
I marked the point I'm trying to make. Short story long. I was a mark for Taz from the IWC days. So when I went to this WWF house show, not knowing who was on the show other than maybe the Steiner brothers, which I was a huge mark for, I popped huge for seeing Taz come out and as the Taz Maniac and having this match with Jim Powers on the WWF house show, ironically in the room that I had so much connection with.
Yeah. So Taz would, obviously as the Taz Maniac, he would go on to debut for ECW, but of course back then it was Eastern Championship Wrestling in October 1993 at NWA Bloodfest. He formed the tag team we were just talking about before with Joe Chetty called the Taz Maniacs. And I'll be honest, I didn't know there was a Joe Chetty prior to doing my research. But Meanie, you said that he, did you ever know him? You ever get an opportunity, either of you, to know him, or Meanie, you know that he's a amateur wrestling coach?
I'm very sure I met him at one of the Lost Battalion shows. He was there, very brief. Hello, how you doing? And again, I was the young guy in the locker room, mouth shut, ears open. So it was very brief. Hello, how you doing? Kind of thing. So yeah, that's my extent of my interaction with Joe Chetty.
What about you, Joel?
I've never met Joe Chetty. I remember the Tasmaniac on IWCCW house shows, and I know they had a ton of tag teams at the time. The Northeast Indies had a ton of tag teams. You know, there was the Pitbulls, and then when you go to IWC, who were also the American Pitbull Express on the Indies in Jersey, and then for IWCCW, you had teams like the Equalizers, Zip and Zap, which I think eventually became Zip, Zap, and Zoom or something like that. Naturally. So I'm trying to, I can't honestly tell you whether I've ever or whether I've never seen the tag team of the Tasmaniacs. It's possible, but I don't believe personally that I may have ever met Joe Chetty. And if I did, it would be the kind of meeting that Meanie described, where it was just, you know, where you meet somebody who's family or friends with somebody that you work with and that you know, and you get introduced to them and you say hello, and you may or may not see them again.
Well, when the team broke up, Taz was put into another team, this time with Kevin Sullivan. They won the tag team championship twice. And during that second reign as tag team champion with Sullivan, the Tasmaniac became a double champion when he also won the television championship for about an hour or so on March 6th. He won the title during a taping for a show that would air March 15th, 1994. However, later in the same evening, he lost the title to JT Smith in a match that would air March 22nd. So just a little fun fact, especially when you compare it to his later run as TV champion. For most of the rest of the year, he floated around the tag ranks, teaming with different partners. He held the title once more, this time with Sabu, until Sabu was legitimately fired by ECW owner Paul Heyman for no showing an event in favor of touring Japan for New Japan Pro Wrestling. Now, I believe that this is, if I'm not mistaken, this is kind of the genesis of the heat between the two. Is that correct?
As far as the heat between the two, I think the heat between
the two being Taz and Sabu, I should say.
Yeah, between Taz and Sabu, I think that led, you know, that might have existed prior to Sabu being legitimately fired in the middle of the ring. Sabu famously said when he showed up to the first night in ECW, he wrestled Taz, and well, he showed up to ECW, and they're like, "Do you want to wrestle Taz?" He goes, "No, but I will." So, in true impressions. In true Sabu form, no, but I will. But yeah, I think, you know, they had a conflicting style, but I think that conflicting style and conflicting viewpoint, but that also brought out the best of them in their feud that would later on happen. I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I'm not sure if that was the spark that caused the legit friction, but I think overall just their difference in styles and difference in philosophies, Sabu coming from the Sheik and Taz coming from Johnny Rods,
Sure.
both totally different trainers, different, points of view. That might have caused a little bit of a friction, but I'm sure the point that, Sabu not showing up definitely put a little bit of fuel in that fire.
Especially when, you're talking about your tag team partner.
Yeah.
This isn't even just talking about an opponent in a match where now you have to figure out how to plug somebody else in there. This is your tag team partner. When you're a tag team, you're married to that person. You're representative of that person. What's Taz supposed to do?
Well,
what's he supposed to do in that instance when his partner doesn't show up?
I'm sorry.
No,
I can
for you to
definitely
apologize.
I can definitely relate to how it feels because one time I had taken a vacation to Florida, and I happened to turn on the Monday night shows, and my tag partner Stevie Richards, who was the leader of the BWO, showed up on the WCW Nitro. I went, I guess the BWO's over.
Wow.
Oh yeah. So
I always thought you were the leader of the BWO, but
Well, Scott Hall used me as a reference as the leader of the BWO, so he can rib Kevin Nash and say, well, if the Blue Meanie's me in the BWO, and he's the leader of the BWO, I should be the leader of the NWO. So, but there's that. So, when you show up to the building and the guy who's your tag team partner, tag team champion, doesn't come, in some ways you could kind of take that personally.
And forgive me, I don't want to, stir anything up between you and Stevie, of course. But I'd never heard that before, that was how you found out. Did you talk to Stevie afterwards? Obviously he didn't let you know ahead of time. What was your conversation with him like?
There was inklings before that. And I'm sure this will be a subject of another episode, with Todd Gordon being the mole. There's inklings that like he might have been talking to somebody at WCW, and we had known Raven went to WCW,
right?
So I always had an inkling that Stevie might go because he's always talking about how he talked to Terry Taylor and all this and that other thing. But I officially never knew Stevie was going to WCW until I turned on Monday Nitro, and he showed up on Nitro, and then we went to the next TV, and that's where they properly, Taz ended the BWO. The BWO comes to the ring, Taz comes to the ring. I know I'm getting ahead of ourselves because he's Taz now, not the Taz Maniac, but he comes out and suplexes Thomas Rodman, which Rodman later no-sold and went and got a hot dog and got heat for that. And then choked out, and suplexed Nova, and then he went to looked at me. I turned around, screamed, ripped off the shirt, and ran to the locker room. So, essentially, that move ended the BWO.
Man. In August 1994, the Tasmaniac competed in a one-night 8-man tournament for the vacant NWA World Heavyweight Championship, losing to Shane Douglas in the quarterfinals. Douglas, of course, would go on to win the tournament and throw down the NWA belt, but that is a story for another time, I'm sure. Fast forward to July 20th, 1995. During a tag team match with Too Cold Scorpio and Dean Malenko, Taz was hit with a spike pile driver. As he explained on the DVD documentary, The Rise and Fall of ECW, quote, I landed right on my forehead and just jacked my whole neck back, and that was it. The neck injury was so bad that, according to Tommy Dreamer, hospital staff couldn't believe that Taz walked into the hospital after the match. Though he was unable to wrestle, it is important to note Paul Heyman continued to pay him per their oral agreement, forging a loyalty between the two for a very long time. And I think I always like to point out those stories about Paul Heyman because there are so many other stories that are conflicting of him and what he might or might not owe somebody. So I think that's a real stand-up thing that he did. Now, Meanie, you didn't actually join ECW until a few months later, but Joel, I know you joined in the summer. Were you there by July 95?
No.
Okay. So neither of you were there for the neck injury.
Beginning of the fall. I started on September 23rd of 95.
Oh, okay. So at that point, I guess by the time,
Well, I have something I could add here.
please.
When I always go back to when I was training at Al Snow's gym. I would schedule my trips around my trips home around ECW arena shows, and I would go home, spend a week with the family, and then go to the ECW arena show, and then right there drive straight back off to Ohio. But there was one instance where my classmate John Pee Wee Moore, who was an ECW official, asked me if he can ride back to Ohio with me, and go back, because he stayed at the school as well. I said absolutely. So my first interaction with Taz was, in true ECW form. Paulie paid you after the show, after you did your promo, to make sure, he got the promo out of you. So Pee Wee needed to get paid. So I kind of hung out backstage in the back of the ECW arena, where, now it's a bar and all this. It looks great now, but then it was a little bit scary. And I was kind of sitting off in the shadows because I don't want to be seen and be in the way or whatever.
Sure.
So I stand up because P was about to leave, and then here comes Taz. I'm like, oh shit, here comes Taz. He goes, hey, how you doing? And I was like so scared. I as the Tasmaniac. I had seen him as this crazy wild man character. I didn't know him as a person yet. Later on, I would go to know him a little bit better, when Sabu would book him for NWA Sabu out in Michigan. I got to know him a little bit more out there. But first impression, this big, crazy, wild, painted up character comes up, goes, hey, how you doing? And that was about it. I was like, oh, he's not really from Tasmania.
And that was the day that Meanie found out wrestling is not 100% on the up and up. So following Taz's neck injury, he made appearances with the Steiner brothers, standing in their corner during matches with the Eliminators and getting physical with Jason. This was really the start of Taz, not the Tasmaniac. But it was at the November to Remember event when Taz turned heel and joined up with referee Bill Alfonso. Meanie, this was actually your debut show for ECW, was it not?
November to Remember. Well, I always joke that I had two debuts. The first time was October 95, and then I debuted for ECW November to Remember as the Blue Meanie, November to Remember 95. Yes.
What do you remember from that night? I guess both of you, Joel, you would have been there as too, right?
Yeah, I just started out a few weeks earlier.
So what? It's kind of interesting. This is the night where Taz joins up with Bel Alfonso, which is really the time period that kind of takes him to that next level. But it's also, Joel, your first big event with the company. Meanie, your first official event, specifically the Blue Meanie's first official event in ECW. Any memories from that November to Remember? Joel, start with you.
It was the first big show that I ring announced all of, because Bob Ortiz wasn't available. So I had been doing some ring announcing and some timekeeping. But that was a show that I was just the primary ring announcer for every match of the show. And was my first maybe TV ring announcing, I'm not sure. There is a Steve Austin Mikey Whipwreck match, I believe. Was that on that show? Was
I believe
just the two of them? If that's right, then that is a match that they use the audio, I think the ambient audio from the room, from the fans, and also my ring intro of Mikey and Austin. They use that in, I want to say, WWE 2K14 or whatever year that it was in the video game that they included that match. Big
That's
show.
cool.
And you know what was weird about that show is that I'm up at Cornell, and I had sent out a tape and pictures and stuff, basic audition resume stuff, to EFC, the Extreme Fighting Championships, which was going to be at the time in late 95, the number 2 group in MMA. They wanted to be the ones that were going to challenge UFC. And they wound up not really going anywhere. And their show was supposed to be, I want to say, somewhere like Wilmington, North Carolina, and got moved to Brooklyn, New York, of all places, at an armory. It was either that way or the other way around. But long story short, why I always remember them for that date is that their first big show, they had a major event also on the same night as November to Remember. And I remember there being a bit of a conflict and me actually wondering if I was going to wind up here, this 20-year-old kid having to make a decision of one event over the other event. And it was a dark time for MMA and for No Holds Barred. And that's why the show, I think, got moved. And it had almost got canceled. It got saved. It got moved. They wound up going with Harry Belafonte's son as the ring announcer, leading me to get the opportunity to, with a clear conscience, go to November to Remember, where I came to find out I would be able to be the ring announcer for the entire event there without having to make a choice between one show or the other. So for me, that's the spot in my mind that November to Remember holds for me.
Well, I think we know which promotion got the better ring announcer that night.
Also, I'd like to add that, like you said, there was the birth of Taz. And then, well, you asked if I thought that, Sabu getting fired was the cause of their heat. Sorry with the new mouth. And that moment where Paul and Taz went to the ring to fire Sabu, I think that was the initial debut
The spark,
of
yeah.
the spark that was Pete Sinurcha, because Taz had been the Tasmaniac, and here he comes out in the Art Zubaz and the Letterman jacket with the hat and, with the spit cup. Hey, brother, and I think that was the initial spark for what would go on from the transition from Tasmaniac to Taz. And I had been still going to shows. I wasn't with the company yet. As he was doing that transition from Tasmaniac to Taz, I remember being in the crowd as a fan, sitting in maybe the third row. And I remember fans remarking that, like, Taz's new gimmick, somebody turned around and goes, "It reminds me of Ivan Putski." I don't know why that pops in my head, but to a lot of people in the crowd, like the old school WWF fans who are going to the ECW shows, early Taz, the new look with the buzz cut and the beard and all that stuff, they thought he looked like,
the stockier, not quite as tall as the other.
Taz reminded people in those early days as a young Ivan Putski, who was basically a ripoff of the Mighty Igor. But I don't know why that, certain thoughts come to mind. And that early Taz, where he was coming out to Anthrax's Keep It in the Family and all that stuff and finding his way. And then, eventually he was, the baby face when he came out. But like you said, November to Remember 95, he turned heel and aligned himself with Fonzie.
And we're
I'm sorry.
No, continue, please.
I think it was a much needed thing to to put a fresh coat of paint on his character up to that point.
Oh, absolutely.
Fonzie basically became Taz's Don King, so to speak.
What happened with that match, Taz was the guest referee for Fonzie versus Todd Gordon. Taz refused to count the pinfall for Todd Gordon, and of course aligns himself with Fonzie. Afterwards, Taz would cut a promo where he claimed that no one was looking after him while he was injured and that no one cared. Obviously, we know in real life, Heyman was still paying him. But the story was that he'd been forgotten and that Alfonso was the only one helping to keep food on his family's table. So really, this is one of the earlier times that you could point to of ECW having these storylines that were really based in reality, because that's something everyone can just kind of relate to. It's not some far-fetched quote unquote wrestling angle. That is just straight up Taz turned heel because he's pissed off because nobody cared about him when he got injured except for this one guy. So now he's with this one guy, and to me, that stuff always stands out as some of the things in ECW and the stories that I always love so much. He also mentioned that he was angry that Sabu was brought back that very night. Something that rumor has it is how he may have actually felt. But Taz, what's that?
Yeah, because a lot of ECW storylines, they brought some of that behind the scenes stuff out in front of the camera. And like you said, Taz cuts the promo saying, Fonzie kept the food on his table when in reality it was Paul. They turned the Paul into the Fonzie and made that a story going forward.
Yeah. Taz would eventually return to the ring December 19th, 1995 at Holiday Hell with a new look and wrestling style. Taz said in an interview, quote, "It was a hybrid, to be honest with you, of the Missing Link, the Wild Samoans, and the Steiner brothers. When the Steiners first started out with doing different suplexes, like really early Steiners, very early. I was inspired by Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson used to wear a towel over his neck. He wore a white towel, he cut a hole in it, and he wore it almost like a poncho. A little bit of the Human Suplex Machine, a lot of it was inspired by Mike Tyson, who wore low black boots, black trunks, no frills, the towel. He was from an area of Brooklyn called Brownsville, which wasn't far from where I was from. I could relate to him. We were both in our prime at the same time. He actually did much better than I did. I wanted to do it on my head so that no one would think I was being inspired by Mike Tyson." So that's a fun little thing too of where the towel on the head came from. Yes,
and also they trained, more so than that they're just from Brooklyn. They trained in the same room.
Did they really?
Mike Tyson trained for boxing at Gleason's gym, and
yeah,
Taz trained for wrestling at Gleason's gym. Yep.
Wow, very interesting. I will say I remember a time Taz told me a story about his towel and how he would just make it as dirty and disgusting as he possibly could. And then one time his wife washed it for him. And he looks, she's like, "It was just awful. I had to wash it." He's like, "You're killing the gimmick. You're killing the gimmick." So, the new character had him in a black and orange singlet, exhibiting more physically intense in-ring style, focusing his offense on mat wrestling and suplexes, which Joey Styles dubbed Tazplexes, earning him the nickname the Human Suplex Machine. He also debuted at this time his Taz Mission, or the Kata Hajime finishing maneuver, causing opponent. What's that?
Bless you.
Oh, thank you. Causing opponents.
That was me being Bobby Heenan. I'm sorry.
No, don't ever apologize for trying to be like Bobby Heenan. Causing opponents to tap out to signal their submission, as you would see in mixed martial arts, instead of nodding their head or vocally saying yes. For my money, that kind of changed the game. Nobody, as far as I remember, and I could be wrong, but nobody, as far as I remember, was doing a tap out to a submission in wrestling, at least on a larger stage, prior to Taz. Do you guys remember anybody else doing that? Because now that is commonplace. I mean, you will see the biggest matches at a WrestleMania, and it's that the hand is there, and are they going to tap? And you're waiting for that. That's a game changer and something I don't think people talk about enough. Would you guys remember anyone prior to Taz doing that?
No, and it's funny you bring that up because I think that was the impetus for wrestling using the tap out in a pro wrestling style.
Yeah.
And Taz, was very much, our ultimate fighter. And that's where, in MMA and UFC, the tap out became synonymous with just signaling I quit or saying uncle. I quickly learned that, in wrestling, when you're trying to, you're in a submission, you're trying to get the fans behind you, you start pounding on the mat like that. I quickly had to retrain my brain,
right?
Not to do that, because then people would think I was tapping out to the match. So around that time, I had to fuckulate my brain to,
Well said.
This means quit. And so I had to, do the fist or the Hulk Hogan. No. And stuff like that. But I was wrestling, barring from the world of MMA. And I have to say this, speaking of shoots, you're talking about what Taz, turned heel during Fozzy versus Todd Gordon. It needs to be said, if they ever do a compilation of shoot fights, those Taz and those Fonzie and Todd Gordon matches were some of the most brutal shoot fights because they were never trained and stuff like that, to the point where
young wrestlers who are training, aspiring wrestlers, maybe skip some of those matches when you're watching tape.
I believe in that match, Todd Gordon broke his wrist on Fonzie's head with a punch or something like that. I just needed to note that because it was like the most funny those matches the boys would watch, Fonzie and Todd kill each other. But getting back to Taz being our ultimate fighter in MMA and shooting, he brought, to my best of my knowledge, he's the one who introduced tapping out to the world of professional wrestling, which later on WWE stole, for which they went on to steal much of ECW stuff.
Yes. I'm sure we will talk about many of those in future episodes of That Was Extreme. Heading into the summer, Taz joined up with Brian Lee to face Tommy Dreamer and Terry Gordy, and later Dreamer and Dr. Death Steve Williams. Taz also developed a friendship with the Eliminators based on mutual respect, and they occasionally involved themselves in his matches. In real life, Perry Saturn and Taz were both trainers at ECW's House of Hardcore Wrestling School, which I believe we've talked about in a previous episode. Some of the students from the school would actually accompany Taz to the ring as Team Taz. Anything else from the school that you guys remember that stands out to you of the ECW House of Hardcore?
Do you want to take that, Joel, or I?
Honestly, I had never physically been there. I had some great talks. I did an autograph signing a few weeks ago with Danny Doring and Roadkill. And man, it would be perfect if they were here right now, and the stuff that we were talking about there, because they are, real experts as far as the school and knowing a lot of the students that came through there. No, I'd never been there. It was tough. It was a tough school. It was as tough as any other school, maybe tougher. If there was no hope for you, and if there was no chance that you would advance, and if the office didn't want you to advance and they wanted you to get the point that either this school or wrestling was not for you, you'd find that out. There was no shyness about that. It was very, very much. It was as much a school and as much ECW's little developmental territory, where certain guys who were working as Team Taz on the house shows on TV were learning how to become current and future superstars. Right. It was tough, man. It was not easy at all. It was not the kind of school, it wasn't ECW's primary business. So, not to say every school is like this, but, a crappy school, there are, let's say, some schools that just want your $3,000 and it's a business and they'll churn you out into the wrestling world and maybe you're not meant to be anybody. That's not what this school was. This school, because it was a sub of ECW and reflected ECW with the name, with the trainers and everything else, the geography, and the fact that if you graduated from this school, you would earn a spot on the roster. I guess, like I said, it was very much kind of a developmental territory.
Sure.
And if I might add, it was Taz and Perry pretty much bonded together in the locker room, and they went on to forge the school as a way to have it was run basically like an old school Japan dojo. I had a chance to go up there a handful of times to train. Sign guy Louis D'Angeli wanted to go up there to train because he knew, being in the corner of the Dudleys, sometimes they would have to ask him to, bump whether to take total elimination and all that stuff. And me and him will coordinate and ride up. And Taz was really good as a trainer, to the point where it could be 6 months to a year and you wouldn't even have stepped in the ring. First, him and Perry would have you do the calisthenics and try to see who was the strongest. It wasn't to weed you out. I mean, it's not like they're trying to take your money and make you quit. But like, Joel said, it's still reputation,
Right.
the ECW reputation. They weren't there to make money. They were there to make people who are strong enough to hang in ECW. So you do the calisthenics, then you would have to learn chain wrestling. And then eventually, maybe in 6 months, if they thought you were up to snuff, then you set foot in the ring.
Right.
And Taz was so disappointed to the point where I mistakenly, he had saw me get up into the ring. And normally I'm good about this with wiping my feet on the mat. And so I rolled in the ring, stood up, and he went, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, brother." And he told me to get out. And it was not half hot. It was like a quarter hot. He's like, "All right." So he went and got the disinfectant and sprayed the whole ring with disinfectant because I had technically desecrated the ring with getting out and not wiping my feet on the mat as per usual. I normally would do, but I was so excited to be there, see the ring, and get it in there. And it was a cool experience. Taz gave me some pointers. Like I said, you could get in the wrestling business. It doesn't matter. I was trained by Al Snow, but he never stopped learning. And Taz was very kind. Taz and Perry were very kind to work with me as they were working with Louis Dean. I wanted to say Louis. Well, he was Louis Dangerously.
Yeah.
But yeah, they worked with Lou and they worked with me. And during my course of going up to the House of Hardcore is when I first met a young Devon Dudley who was about to join the company. Devon, on this little side road here, Devon was a staple of the New York wrestling independents as A-Train. And they had he had been discovered to and brought into ECW, and they wanted him to come up to the House of Hardcore school to work out a little bit. And it was during the course of being with Taz and Perry at House of Hardcore that they were talking about, Devon debuting for ECW, but they, and people are like, "Oh, kayfabe doesn't exist in ECW." Well, Devon was going to debut as A-Train, and his boots had an A on it. And at that time, I'd stopped wearing the traditional wrestling boots, and for regular boots. I was like, "Hey, if you want, I can lend you my boots." And when that weekend in Reading, Pennsylvania, when Devon debuted under Hood, he wore my boots. So a little side road story for ECW House of Hardcore. I don't know if I'm ever going to get a chance to tell that story down the line, but it was just a great atmosphere. It was run super professional. If you made it through Taz's House of Hardcore, Taz and Perry Saturn's House of Hardcore, then you were ready for anything.
At November to Remember, Taz stormed to the ring and interrupted Joey Styles and quote unquote stole Paulie's thunder by announcing that there would be a quote big show in the first quarter of the new year, basically telling the fans in attendance that ECW's first pay-per-view was on the horizon. At that big show, he guaranteed that Sabu would finally face him. Later that night, he came out to force Scorpio to leave the ring and went on an angry tirade, abusing Bob Ortiz and holding him hostage in the ring. Taz demanded Sabu come out and face him, and twice even led the crowd in a Sabu chant to get him to enter the ring. Several officials and wrestlers came out, and Taz eventually got his hands on Paulie. The lights went out. When they came back on, Sabu was in the ring across from Taz. This was the first time they had been in the ring together since early 1995. But before they could lock up in typical ECW fashion, the lights went out again. During Sabu's match, where he teamed with Rob Van Dam to face the Eliminators and the Gangsters in a three-way dance, Taz attempted to attack his former partner, but Van Dam saved Sabu and was choked out in the aisle for his troubles. This distraction caused Sabu to get hit with total elimination, and his team lost. At that point, Taz kind of also began a mini feud with Rob Van Dam, just dominating him and really setting the stage. We talked about, I'll get to that in a second, but as we started to head into 1997, Taz and Sabu continued to try to get at one another with no actual contact. And we talked about that on our Barely Legal episode, available in the archives at adfreeshows.com, which I've always wanted to say. But just to quickly touch base, Taz defeated Sabu only to have Fonzie turn on him and join Sabu and Rob Van Dam. Before we get into the next stage after that, again, like I said, we did talk about this on our first episode of That Was Extreme, which is available at freeshows.com. But one of the things that made this so damn special, this match, was that lights on, lights off thing. That the fact that they just were not ever touching. So just to touch base for a minute, how important was that? The fact that we kept them apart, especially in a day like today, where if people are supposed to wrestle, let's say the main event of a WrestleMania, well, you know they're going to be involved in a 6-man tag. They're going to be involved in a one-on-one but different stipulation match, and they're going to wrestle 15 times in the 4 weeks before the match is announced and the actual match takes place. So, how important, guys, was that to keep them separate?
It was very important, and I was a part of a lot of those pull aparts. And everybody talks about the real life friction between Taz and Sabu. A lot of that spelled off in some of those pull aparts where they're trying to go at each other. And I was fortunate enough to be on the Sabu side where he had some colorful words for Taz. Come on, Taz, fuck you. Fuck you, Taz. And you're trying to pull him apart, but I'm burying my face in my shirt, trying to, not laugh and kill the gimmick on camera where he's like, fuck you, and but yeah, it was like you said, it's essential to keep them apart, or what's the point of buying the pay-per-view? Right. Had they wrestled before? Yes. It was Sabu versus Tasmaniac, but this is the rebirth of Taz. So technically it's a different wrestler in spirit. He's the MMA fighter. He's our UFC MMA guy, and he was cutting some of the most fiery promos, leading up to this. So, to be a part of a lot of those pull aparts was intense. Even though Sabu would throw out one-liners that almost had you break character.
Joel, do you agree the keeping them apart was so important to making it work?
Yeah, but Meanie, the irony, isn't it it's just wrestling that these two guys who out in front of the camera, in front of the fans, are supposed to hate each other. The fact that they actually hate each other makes you laugh.
Oh yeah,
that's just wrestling. That's just wrestling. That's just wrestling. Like, wait a minute, these guys hate each other. They're not supposed to hate each other because they hate each other. They're supposed to hate each other because it's a work. They really hate each other, and it makes you laugh. Man, keeping them apart. Keeping them separated, that's definitely a wrestling trope, man. But it goes back to certain territories just were, like you said, there's a school of thought that if there's going to be the big match at, let's say, a WrestleMania, do some smaller matches that build up tension leading up to it. Mm-hmm. But there's another school of thought psychologically that if you want people to spend money to see these guys finally get at each other one-on-one, the best way to do it is to tease it, but to never let the two guys touch. And that was definitely the way we were approaching it.
One match that I remember, and you can look back on it and say it didn't matter in the long run, but The Rock and Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania. When that match was announced, it didn't matter if you were a fan of The Rock, a fan of Hogan, whatever it was, this was something special. What the intensity just in the setup to that. And then they had, I want to say it was The Rock and Steve Austin against the NWO in a handicap match on Raw, a week before the pay-per-view. And Hogan and The Rock get in there and they're wrestling each other. And I hated it. I hated that because, I got the fact that, okay, they could wrestle each other. It doesn't mean that the match is going to be any different at all. But one of the things you're excited for is to see that first lockup, to see that first interaction between the two in the ring, to see them touch for the first time. And it was given away. And I didn't agree with it at the time for whatever my opinion's worth, but I didn't agree with it. And that's why, again, I go back to this as such an important decision that was made. In response
They had,
to,
but Josh, the thing is, they had the luxury, though, and they probably knew or assumed they did, that they would be selling tickets and getting buys, whether they did it that way or the
sure,
other. Whereas for us, it was our first dance, and every buy was precious.
yes,
So I think we treated it as the golden goose that it was.
very well said. So in response to all of this, in response to Fonzie turning on him, in a somewhat confusing fashion after the match, Fonzie tried to explain it, and I don't know that anybody really got what was happening, but either way, Taz
entertaining.
Yeah, it was. Taz began teaming with Chris Candido to face Sabu and Rob Van Dam. 2 months later at WrestlePalooza, Taz lost to Sabu in a rematch, marking his first loss since 1995, which I thought was interesting. However, later in the night, he won the TV title from Shane Douglas to begin his second reign as TV champion. Throughout 1997, Taz began feuding with the Triple Threat, in addition to Sabu and Van Dam, where he sometimes teamed up with Tommy Dreamer during that feud. Taz would go on to team with Bam Bam Bigelow against Shane Douglas and Chris Candido, where Bam Bam Bigelow would turn on Taz, leading to a TV title match where Taz would ultimately lose the title to Bam Bam Bigelow at Living Dangerously on March 1st, 1998. His matches with Bam Bam were great, in my opinion, but this one stands out for the finish. Taz had Bigelow in the Taz mission, and they fell through the ring. What do you guys remember about that spot? And did everyone in the locker room know that was happening, or was that met with kind of a, what the hell did I just see?
Little spoiler. I was kind of smarting up to it beforehand. Much like when WWE helped us with our very first pay-per-view, Barely Legal, when it came to like lighting and preparing for everything that involved with a pay-per-view, as far as setting up how to get paid and all this good stuff. WWE helped with this stunt. With the there was a trap door built into the ring, and to where as far as what I came to know is, to set it up, Taz and Bigelow would go out and brawl around the ring. While they were brawling around the ring, two of the ring crew members crawled down the length of the entrance ramp underneath the ring, undid the trap door, which is underneath the ring, and untied all the ring apron, or the ring canvas, to loosen it up. So when they would go through, the canvas would give.
Right.
I saw them working with the door prior to the show and all that good stuff. Now, here's a little piece of useless knowledge. Not too many people know. As you watch, Taz hop on Bigelow's back and put him in the Hachikachime or whatever the Hachi.
Nailed it.
Yeah, nailed it. And a little subtle move. John Finnegan was out of position. He didn't see Bigelow tapping. Bigelow was tapping right before, he did the Nesty plunge and then went through the ring. To properly measure the bump where Bigelow was going to say, fuck it, and dive backwards to make sure they hit the sweet spot, ring crew took, when you are wrestling, ring ropes are wrapped in electrical tape. Well, they had Bigelow put his hand right in the proper spot. They put extra ring tape on that spot. So as you watch Bigelow feel the ropes along the way, he feels the fat part of the ring rope and takes the plunge backwards and goes through the ring.
Wow.
So that's how that whole stunt was set up. Much
Never
of the ring
caught that.
Yeah, the ring crew went underneath while they brawled around the crowd, undid the trap door, undid the ring canvas. And then, when Taz had him in the soup in the chokety choke, I'm calling it like I'm calling a match. He had him in the chokety choke. You see Bigelow with the secret tap over here. Finnegan doesn't see it. He touches the ropes. He feels the fat part of the rope, kind of like a steering wheel. When you the part of the steering wheel where you feel the proper distance.
Yeah,
it did it like that.
the old
So when he
10 and
felt, Yeah, he felt it too, and then took the nasty plunge, and the rest was history.
Joel, did you know that was going to happen?
I didn't. I don't remember knowing that it was going to happen. I think I wasn't smart with it.
So when you saw that happen, did you see it live? Were you watching the monitor?
Yeah,
were you kind of like what was your reaction like to that? If you didn't know that was happening,
when you're working in the business regularly, when it's your full time, maybe not everybody. I don't want to speak for everybody else. Let me dial it back and just speak for myself. So from 95 on, I'm in ECW, right? So if you're talking about like 97, let's say, if you're talking about I'm already doing it every week for a couple of years, around that time, like the late 90s, you're just predisposed to believe that everything is a work, to the point where you almost start to believe that everything outside wrestling is primary. First, you believe it's a work, and then you start to say, well, could it be a shoot? Let's see. Well, maybe, maybe she didn't give me, those extra 25 cents change because she's bad at math, or she just didn't mean to, or she's having a bad day. So maybe she didn't intend, you know what I mean? Like every move you almost think is like, because you're just, it's a con. It's predicated on a lie. So again, I don't want to speak for everybody that's the way that them being in the business had them wired. But in the late 90s in ECW, for somebody who was, in their very early 20s, that's the way that I was wired. So when I saw it happen live, I assumed it was a work. But I don't know that that's a good or a bad thing, because I wasn't watching the pay-per-view where Owen Hart passed away, and somebody who was called me on the phone and said, I think Owen Hart took a really bad spill. It was legit, it looked like. And like they were telling me either after it had been announced that he did pass away, or maybe right before, but they were telling me that they feared that Owen had died. And my natural inclination was just wait a while, they'll write it out and it's a work. And I'm sure that, you know what I mean? So it's just that's just the way you were wired. So when I saw them go through the thing, because I knew that trapdoors existed, because I think that's how, I want to say, Rick Rude. Was it Rick Rude or was it Davey Boy, or was it? But well, one of them, I think, maybe both of them.
Davey
I don't
Boy
know,
injured his back on the trapdoor for Warrior.
Davey Boy for sure, right? And I can't remember if Rick Rude had a similar incident, but so I knew that trapdoors, existed, or within wrestling magic could be made to exist as part of our props and part of our setting. So I assumed it was a work rather than them going through the wood or whatever the stage was made of, because that it's just wrestling.
And that's the other part of it. You said going through the stage. There's a point where they went through the stage. That was, I think, a later event. But this is going through the ring. Right. Going through the stage is something that I think if you really were to sit
this
there,
was the one with the quarter of the ring, and then the rest of the show they put like tape around the...
Yes.
Yeah. Same thing. I wasn't smartened up to that at all, because I didn't need to be.
Right.
And that for sure, I do remember seeing that I was watching the monitor and I saw it live. And yeah, no, same exact... I mean, with the exception of a ring and a stage, same exact thing. I said to myself, wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that was kind of at our level to do.
Right.
But hey, it's wrestling magic.
So here's the thing with a stage, you could kind of look at that and say, well, I could see they broke through. They're heavy, they broke through the wood in the stage. If you're somebody like you, for instance, who's been there and seen and helped build how many rings, you know that something's a little like, okay, I could see them breaking through the wood. How'd they get through those metal beams? So it's kind of, as a kid, when I was watching it, to me, oh my God, I'm losing my mind. I can't believe this happened. But I didn't know how a ring was built at that point. So, and I think the fans, look, it's the same way you have the suplex in this, Taz was a part of this, the suplex from Brock Lesnar to the Big Show, and the ring collapsed. You have Taz yelling, holy shit. Your first thought is, oh my God, like it collapsed the ring. And then you kind of start thinking to yourself like, all right, come on. Like we know, we know how this had to have been, but it was an exciting moment no matter what. After losing
Memorable.
the TV title. What's that?
Memorable for sure.
Absolutely.
And in some ways, I wish that had been the last match of the night, just because of the fact they had another match. And
although that did, while that took away, while that would take away from the other match, that does kind of bring in that feeling of like, well, this must have been legit, because they never would have planned this to be if they still had other matches to do, you know. So I could see it from both sides there. After losing the TV title, Taz was elevated into the World Heavyweight Championship picture, and in May 1998, with Shane Douglas injured and unable to wrestle, Taz was given an old World Television Championship, painted orange, and began cutting promos declaring himself the FTW Heavyweight Champion. This is the original Winged Eagle, the Winged Eagle. But I always loved that ECW, their TV title was Winged Eagle. Their tag titles were the Intercontinental, the design-wise. But this was the original FTW title, was the Winged Eagle TV title, became the FTW title. And though the championship was unsanctioned in storyline, it was still defended at ECW shows until Douglas was healthy. And just before having his match for the World Heavyweight Championship, Taz gave the FTW title to Sabu in a match where he physically pulled Sabu on top of him to allow Sabu to get the pin. Finally, Taz defeated Shane Douglas for the World Heavyweight Championship at Guilty as Charged, thus ending Douglas's year-long reign. This was thanks to Candido turning on Douglas. Taz quickly reignited his feud with Sabu, this time over Taz's World Heavyweight Championship and Sabu's FTW Heavyweight Championship. The rivalry culminated in a title unification match at Living Dangerously, where Taz defeated Sabu to unify the FTW and World Heavyweight Championship. He would begin his next rivalry with Chris Candido, and we'll get to that in a second. But the FTW title, what were your thoughts? Meanie, I don't even know if you were there at this point. You may have, but what were your thoughts with the FTW title? What did you think of that?
It was definitely unique in the ways that, and again, ECW was ahead of its time to where, later on WWE, Steve Austin was the world champion. He would have the Smoking Skull belt, and The Rock would have the Brahma Bull belt, and different belts for different champions and stuff like that. But the one point that always cracked me up is when Taz pulled Sabu on top. Taz pulled Sabu on top of him to purposely throw the match, so giving Taz the FTW belt. On the newer, not the Winged Eagle, but the new FTW belt, it said Taz across the top. And Sabu was so annoyed by the fact that his name was Taz on the belt that he took a piece of tape and wrote Sabu on it for the belt, which was much like he did with Sabu on his arm.
Yeah.
So, a little other useless knowledge that there's one point where Taz, he writes Sabu on his arm or whatever. He thought he deserved a little bit more money from Paul Heyman, so he put Sabu on his arm and made the S a $sign with an arrow pointed up.
Wow. That is fantastic. Taz would begin his next rivalry with Chris Candido. They had a short match at Hardcore Heaven 99, which Taz quickly won. However, he was attacked by the Dudley Boys after the match, leading to a title defense against Bubba Ray Dudley in a Falls Count Anywhere match in the main event later that night, which Taz won to retain the title. Fun fact, I was backstage at this show. It was the night that I met the one and only Joe Gertner, and the night that I ran around trying unsuccessfully to get Rob Van Dam coffee. I mention all of that because I remember watching Taz lying on the floor in the locker room getting stitched up after the show. And it was the first time I had ever had the opportunity to see something like that firsthand, to really experience the aftermath. Because we've all seen the behind the scenes stuff like that now as fans, but back then at 15 years old, it was a real wake up call of the toll that this business could take on somebody. Joel, you took a fireball to the face that night, if memory serves. Is that correct?
Sounds about right.
I remember bumping into you in the stairwell and asking to take a picture with you, which you agreed to, and then suggested that maybe I don't tell anybody at what point in the evening we took this picture. Perhaps I suggest that it was before the show started and not after the show.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Who said kayfabe was dead?
Yep. Taz would go on to defend the title for 252 days. However, during that time, he signed with the WWF. Meanie, you had already sold out to the man at this point, but Joel, you were still there in ECW. What was the reaction like backstage to hear that Taz had signed with WWF, especially for you, as you had just said goodbye to the Dudley Boys a few months earlier? Now your world champion is leaving.
Man, it's just business. You know, it's just water cooler talk for us, talking work talking business at work. Just business, man. You know, different people were talking about how, Taz, was so personally close to Paul and to the office, and he's a New York guy. And, it almost depends, the New York guys talked about it. And the Philly guys talked about it. And, I don't know, everybody talked about it, but at the end of the day, it's a business, and everybody understands that Taz just probably did what was best for him and his family.
Was there any concern in the locker room at the bigger picture of this? Like I mentioned, the Dudleys had just left. They were in the midst of a long reign as tag champions when the decision was made. I remember they even ran kind of with the story of we're going to take I remember a promo which we're going to take these belts and we're going to hand deliver them to Vince McMahon's desk. And but so you have the Dudleys leave, now you have Taz leave. Did ECW's locker room look at this as oh my God, the ship is sinking, or did they look at this as, okay, this is great, it's time for the next group to come up?
I mean, depends how you measure. We've been rated already since '95. When you look at like the cruiserweights and the luchadors, and like we were so used to it. WCW did most of it, not WWF, but then WWF would have every right to call a person or two up from the top of our game because they were supplying us with mid-carders, and we were kind of helping develop some of their talent. And some people knew that at the time, and some people didn't. But I mean, at the end of the day, we were so hot. We were still in our creative peak, I think. Maybe on the latter end, and again, it all depends how you measure. But we were definitely still peaking. We were definitely still strong. We definitely had a lot of young talent that was ready to step up. So not to disrespect Taz and say that, it wasn't any loss to not have him with us anymore. Mm-hmm. It was. And the Dudleys, and whenever any of our top guys left, it was a huge deal. And, the talent that stayed thought about it, but we didn't worry. And don't you dare ask the office. Like, when I say office, I mean like guys like, Steve Carroll and kind of guys that were doing like day-to-day ops, but that were away from the talent, because these guys were convinced that as long as you had the ECW logo on the mat, and as long as the TV billboards had the ECW logo, you could put any old person in there and it didn't matter, because people didn't buy tickets to come to the show to see certain talent face each other. They bought tickets to the experience that was ECW.
That's interesting. You could look at that different ways. You could look at the positive of that as a brand, and then you could also look at the negative of that as discounting the individual talent. Taz
at the end of the day, fans are chanting ECW, ECW, ECW. People figured the atmosphere of ECW was the selling point, and
there's certainly truth to that.
And we were just the revolving cast,
I mean, in a lot of ways, ECW could have been considered in such a Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well.
Yeah, you tune into that. And I think that doesn't discount, obviously, the tremendous amount of talent that has come and gone through Saturday Night Live. But at the same time, it's Saturday Night Live, and there's something to that brand name. They say the same thing now about WrestleMania, that people are buying a ticket because WrestleMania is coming. They've bought those tickets, and it's sold out before they've ever announced a single person who's going to be on the show. Taz would lose the title in a three-way dance elimination match at Anarchy Rules on September 19th, 1999. Taz was scheduled to defend the title against Masato Tanaka until Taz spotted Mike Awesome in the crowd and invited him to join the match, because why not? It became a three-way dance. Tanaka delivered a roaring elbow to Taz, followed by Awesome hitting an awesome splash on Taz, and then both men pinned Taz to eliminate him. Awesome would go on to win with an Awesome Bomb, and after the match, Taz handed over the title to Awesome, and the three men shook hands with each other. As Taz walked out of the ring, a large portion of the ECW locker room joined him on the entrance ramp to give him an emotional send-off. Joel, were you a part of that at all, or do you remember any emotional send-off in the locker room after the fact?
I think his friends obviously are on the phone with him, and they're hanging out with him before and after the show. I think we probably got the emotional send-off. We got the message out in front of the fans, and that was, I don't want to tell you that the same way it was done right in front of the camera, then 30 seconds later, everybody was in the back and it went on for another 5 minutes. I don't know that it was like that. Mm-hmm. Again, no disrespect to Taz, whether it was or it wasn't, but I don't think it was that kind of thing. But I think it was meant to show in front of God and everybody, in front of the fans, who are the people that feed us, who are the people that we exist because of. I think it was meant to show them how important Taz was to our history and to our existence.
So that wasn't it, though, for his ECW run just yet, because after being off of ECW TV for most of the fall, he wrestled one final match as an ECW performer at November to Remember, losing to Rob Van Dam via pinfall. His final televised match in ECW aired on November 13th episode of Hardcore TV, in which he received a rematch against Mike Awesome for the World Heavyweight Championship, which he lost. In the DVD, The Rise and Fall of ECW, Taz said that he signed with the WWE because he was in the top of the company and he lost his passion. Which, I mean, can happen. That's fair enough. Obviously, he saw something else for him, and that was the WWE and an extra Z. Because Taz would debut with that extra Z at the 2000 Royal Rumble with a win over the previously undefeated Kurt Angle at Madison Square Garden. And in an interview with Bill Apter on his old podcast, The Apter Chat, Bill's young, talented, and incredibly handsome co-host asked Taz about how he felt that night debuting in Madison Square Garden. Taz said that his debut was the beginning of the end of his push. He said, quote, when I debuted and that pop happened and all that jazz, and I talked about this on my show many times, when I was walking down the aisle and I had that black towel on my head in the garden, it was an amazing feeling. But before I even got to the ring, I knew I was screwed. I knew that I was in trouble because I heard the pop. I've been in the business long enough. I know the business, and I knew that pop was not made or built by the WWE. That was made from myself and the guys that I was fortunate enough to have put me over in ECW. That pop, that's what that pop was. It was not them from advertising a Tribal 13 logo, which was cool because people didn't know it was me coming. That pop was because of the fortunate history that I have had in the tri-state area, especially being a New York guy that was also from ECW. I knew that I was doomed because that's how WWE was back then. It's a lot different now. Today, if I debuted like that, I'd be getting pushed to the moon. What do you guys have to say? Meanie, what do you have to say about that? I mean, you were there. Were you there in January of 2000 or had you left already?
This was this was the day before I was moving to Memphis to be a part of WWE developmental. But what Taz said is really true. Most of all, because in WWE, if you're not a WWE creation, sometimes they don't. Well, at least then. Now, if you come in with an indie credential or outside, they take advantage of that. But back then, the blue, when I debuted in WWE, I debuted in Philly, and I got a decent reaction to the point where Brooklyn Brawler was like, "Hey, hell of a pop," and I could kind of understand to where, they really didn't know what to do with me because, hey, I wasn't a WWE creation. What's a Blue Meanie? What's this? So Taz comes in and he gets gigantic pop.
Oh yeah,
like a pop you could feel through the television. And I totally understand what he says when as soon as he heard that pop, he realized he was screwed because it wasn't based on anything WWE did for him. It's everything he did in ECW, just like he said. So yeah, I wasn't there. Unlike, when the Dudleys went there, I was like maybe the first person on WWF TV after their debut to take 3D, and Bubba and Devon were like, came up to me and asked me what to expect while they were there. I believe that was up in Boston. I had me and Taz did not cross paths in WWE, unlike when the Dudleys went there. So yeah, I basically saw it just like the rest of the world saw it on television. I was about to move to Memphis to try to add a new coat of paint to my career.
So just a few months after Taz arrived in the WWF, Mike Awesome, the man he had lost the ECW World Heavyweight Championship to at Anarchy Rules, secretly signed with WCW. Paul Heyman was able to prevent Awesome from taking the championship belt with him. And in a bizarre piece of professional wrestling history, ECW and WWF officials agreed to have Taz, a WWF wrestler, make a surprise appearance at an ECW show to defeat Mike Awesome, a WCW wrestler, for the ECW World Heavyweight Championship. To me, I remember a couple of things about that. Always stood out to me. The fact that Taz came out to his WWF music, which I thought was kind of fun. Okay, to me, I'm like, I guess they're really making it clear, like, he's a WWF guy. He's not back. The fact that Taz wasn't even wearing his gear. He just showed up, and just the whole thing in general was just crazy. It
was very Forbidden Door. It was like
Yes.
watching wrestling through the Forbidden Doorway. Now that we're talking about AEW and Impact and New Japan and the NWA and all this on Wednesday nights and whatnot, it was very, at the time, it was, I remember from like, I don't know if it was 85 or 86 or when it was, PWI and that family of magazines, like the back cover every month would have like a super card. And they said in the super card that like the WWF champion was taking on the NWA champion and the AWA champion. And this thing with Taz and Mike Awesome was essentially the closest in wrestling at that time that anything had ever come to that.
Yeah, I mean, it really. What was the atmosphere in the locker room, Joel? When, and just your own opinion, and Meanie, yours as well. What was it like when Mike Awesome showed up on Nitro?
Awesome on Nitro.
I mean, he's your world champion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't in the company at the time.
But I mean, Meanie, you weren't in the company at the time, but you still knew what was going on. Like what you must have been, what was going through your head, Meanie, when you first saw that?
Well, from my perspective, I wasn't with ECW at the time, but I was down in Memphis. Like I said, trying to put on a new coat of paint. And for the most part, I was watching just Monday Night Raw. I wasn't really watching, but I was following the dirt sheets. So it was interesting from that perspective that Hey, you know what? I talked about this earlier. I found out Stevie was going to WCW as I tuned in the Monday Nitro. So for, Mike Awesome just to show up and randomly attack Kevin Nash as ECW champion, and they say on the play-by-play, "Hey, it's from ECW. He's the ECW world champion." It was shocking. There was a shock value. Thankfully, he didn't take the belt.
Right.
Thankfully, Paulie had an injunction to prevent that. But yeah, it was definitely shocking. And WCW may have thought they got one over on WWE and ECW, so to speak. Because ECW is basically a subsidiary of WWE unofficially.
Joel, what was it like?
In the locker room, I mean, it's just water cooler talk after the fact. But I watched it at home, on the Monday night, and at the end of the day, like, again, that cynical part of me that thought that everything was a work was saying to myself, okay, so it looks like we have a partnership now with WCW. Because there's no other way that Awesome would be on. And instead of them just sending security and treating him like some other big dude that's in a place where he doesn't belong to be, they instead call him the ECW champion. Why would they mention ECW on their TV and give so many more millions of people the exposure to it? So I think at the top of my mind was, all right, ECW has whatever deal that it has with WWF. And now it looks like ECW has some sort or another deal with WCW.
Taz would go on to hold the ECW title for 10 days before losing it to Tommy Dreamer, during which time he wore it on various WWF TV shows, including an episode of SmackDown where he lost to the WWF champion Triple H. However, on the Rise and Fall DVD, Vince McMahon did express some regret over booking Taz to lose to Triple H. All in all, Taz, the Human Suplex Machine character, had a relatively short run in the wrestling world, but he is remembered as one of the pillars of ECW. Of course, we know Taz would go on to become a commentator for WWE, TNA, and now he does a little commentating and manages Team Taz in AEW, where he's even brought back the FTW title. Believe it or not, Taz has been a commentator or non-in-ring character for decades longer than he was in the ring as a performer. What do you think, Meanie, we'll start with you. What do you think his legacy will be when his career is all said and done?
His legacy will be one of, he was one of the forefathers of ECW. I mean, if you do a Mount Rushmore of ECW, I would definitely think Taz would be on there. As much as I hate doing Mount Rushmores, because ECW was such a cast of characters and stuff like that. But he was a guy. Taz was a hustler, man. He was laser focused on what he wanted to do from the days he ran into Bill Apter at the supermarket and went, "You Bill Apter?"
Stalked him at the Apner, I think, or Apta or something like that. Yeah, Bill always tells a story. He stalked him at the grocery store and then ended up somehow bringing candy over to Bill's kids, which is a fun story.
Hey, man, I know this isn't a slight, but he was a guy who was in the land of giants. Taz was, I feel like a dick bringing this up, but he's 5'9", 5'8", 5'9". And he was a giant amongst giants, mentally and physically, the way he carried himself. He, went through a business that was made for like the Andre the Giant of the worlds and made his stamp on the business. He was laser focused from the time he's trained at, Johnny Rods's all the way through to WWE, where, it's sink or swim. So, he, put his focus on play-by-play, which is something, I often have regrets myself about not, trying to, go through that venture. Because eventually when I was in WWE and they sent me to Memphis and trying to figure out what they were doing with me, in the back of my mind, I was like, man, I would love to do play-by-play. I cursed the day I never decided to at least bring it up.
Yeah.
But Taz went along that path. and got behind the mic, and you got to see the real Taz come out. Taz was like always this guarded guy, he was the tough guy and legit tough, but he always had this exterior of like hard as, but if you knew Taz in the locker room, you knew that the commentator that came out on WWE TV was the genuine article. So much to the fact that another story I have of Taz, I'm in ECW, and he comes up to me, brother, we're getting these jackets made, and one of the guys is behind in payments. We're trying to get more people. You want to get one of these ECW jackets, and Taz was the reason why I felt accepted into the ECW locker room, because he asked me if I wanted to buy a jacket. Hey, if I'm buying a jacket, that means I'm part of the roster, right?
Right.
And there was another time in the exact same spot. It was like a summertime show, and I'm wearing my shirt. I called my Bert and Ernie shirt. It's like a horizontal stripe, something that Bert and Ernie would see, would wear on Sesame Street. And Taz walks in and goes, Meanie, vertical stripes? No. And just kept walking. Yeah, because it was very unflattering because I was rotund. But I was, the character I saw in the ECW locker room all those years came out behind the mic on WWE TV and stuff like that. So and it's a testament to his hard work that he's, he later on went on to have his own radio show called the Taz Show, on CBS Radio, which is a testament to his hard work and hustle. And then he recently just left the Taz Show to work with AEW. So that's another testament to the fact that, his hard work and perseverance and being successful in whatever he does.
He's doing some great work over there. Joel, what do you think his legacy is going to be in wrestling?
Well, he right now he's a lot of fun to listen to on Dynamite. And he's a really, really unique kind of creative. He's a different kind of announcer than everybody else, which is great for him. And you'd expect that from him. And I enjoy his work. People remember him as Taz. And people who knew him from ECW remember him as Taz from ECW. And like you mentioned, it's a testament to ECW making mountains out of molehills all the time and making every event bigger than it could ever be. It's a testament to ECW. We made a super show, a home video release out of a house show called Just Another Night in Glen Olden, Pennsylvania, to prove that you never knew what could happen at a house show when only fan cam was there and TV wasn't. Well, if all this is happening at a house show, oh my gosh, what's going to happen at TV?
Right.
3 weeks of TV are going to, and if that's going to happen at TV in late 96, in early 97, what the hell is this pay-per-view Barely Legal going to be like? And I guess what makes me think of all that and where I'm going with it is, like you said, Taz, probably an in-ring competitor for about 12 years, a lot less of that in ECW, probably a commentator now for closer to 20 years. But at the same time, any ECW fan who still tells you to this day that they're the greatest promotion that ever lived, everything that ECW did, even including the first couple of real lean and local small off-TV years, everything that ECW did is condensed into 9 years, the entire lifespan of the company, 92 to 01. Whereas TNA and Impact Wrestling, 19 years. But somehow they don't have twice the brand loyalty, twice the halo effect that ECW over the decades has had. And it's just a testament, man, like you say, that so many people remember, whether babyface, tweener, or heel, with Fonzie on his own, teaming with Sabu, against Sabu, there without Sabu while Sabu's in Japan, Tasmaniac, not Tasmaniac, there as a rookie with a veteran Kevin Sullivan, or there as a veteran with Team Taz with him. All of that within ECW was 6 years, 7 years out of his career. That's probably something now like 32 years. And it's just, it's a testament to how much he accomplished in that time. But also, like I was saying, with ECW being an event generator and an event builder, how much we could condense and compress and make the most out of one asset that we had, which is time. Because time is limited. Time only moves in one direction. And in wrestling, when you're booking things episodically, if you don't win the battle of time, the war is lost.
We have some great questions from the folks over at adfreeshows.com. So we're going to jump into those right now. A lot of questions came in. We'll see how many we can get. Patrick Ruth, which was the bigger pop, Taz Mission through the ramp or through the canvas? Joel, Meanie, were you there for any of those? Or
I was there for through the canvas, I believe. Through the ramp happened when I was in WWE. So, and I'm a little bit more partial to the one through the ring just because that was in Bigelow's hometown, and Pop once, Bigelow pulled Taz out and pinned him. Again, that's another reason why I wish that was the main event because, Bigelow
can't
winning
go
the
higher
title.
than that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a huge pop and a huge spot to follow. But yeah, definitely through the mat for me.
Joel,
as I remember it, if they weren't equal, I'd say the one through the ring was the bigger one. I think it had a bigger element of surprise, a bigger element that it could be a shoot, because again, this isn't the last match on the show, so why would they make that happen? So I think if it's either or, I think the one through the canvas.
And a shout out to John Finnegan for the sell job.
Yes.
John Finnegan made that spot. As much as the shock of them going to the ring, the reaction for John Finnegan, referee in the ring, really made that spot even more.
Matt Mann.
I'm sorry, real quick, Josh. Our referees, I never give them, in my mind I do, but from my mouth, I never get the opportunity to give them all of the credit that they are due, because ECW, a promotion where we didn't even call disqualifications, you could have had refs in there with blindfolds on, Stevie Wonder sunglasses. You could have had one guy dressed up as one of the three blind mice. You could have played it the way you wanted to. Our refs had such presence and had such an official, that you know what I mean? They looked like wrestling refs. They acted like wrestling refs. And even though they gave the leniency and the slack, and they didn't always call it like maybe a WWF 1970s wrestling ref would, Molyneux and Finnegan, just unbelievable. We were blessed. We had some of the best ref crew and some of the best ref moments. I would put it up against any territory.
Yep.
Matt Mann writes, what are your opinions of Taz and the heat that he had with Aaron O'Grady?
As far as I remember, Aaron O'Grady was who later on went on to become Crash Holly. His heat came from being part of the ring crew, I believe. And a lot of the ring crew had heat with Aaron O'Grady, aka Crash Holly, just because and from what I understood, when they were supposed to be putting the ring together, I'm not even gonna put this story out there, but he clashed with the ring crew a little bit, whether they didn't think he was holding up his end of the bargain as far as putting the ring together, or whatever. I know the story, but it's so jumbled I don't want to put out misinformation. But yeah, he had heat with the ring crew, which in turn Taz wound up having heat with him, I believe, because Chetty was on the ring crew as well, and Chetty was reporting back to Taz, not that he was a stooge, but just saying, hey man, this kid you brought in from because Aaron O'Grady came in from California through Roland Alexander's APW, and
Roland Alexander, tear in his eye.
You gotta read the back of these the boxes when you eat. The Roland Alexander giving diet tips on behind the mat. That's like me giving fucking diet tips. But yeah, Aaron O'Grady came out from APW, and he just clashed with the ring crew, and in turn, it got back to the office, and Taz kind of, said, "Hey, man, you got to hold up your end of the bargain." And Aaron didn't stick around that much more longer.
Adam Sweetie, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Sweetie, I don't know. I'm so sorry. What are, in your opinions, Taz's best matches in ECW? Do you have a favorite match, Meanie? What's a favorite match of Taz's?
Oh my God. Man, there's so many of them. I think the night double tables when him and it was Taz and Sabu versus Benoit and Malenko, where they won the egg belts. And there's that shot of Taz and Sabu both kneeling on the table that's on the top rope, holding up the belts. It became like this epic shot, and that was like right as ECW was, the steamroller was the momentum was starting to go forward. And like I said, with the night the Limers cross, we started drawing more than 1,000 people in that building, and that building was red hot. And I wasn't in the crowd. I mean, I wasn't in the company as a fan yet, but I was part of that crowd, and just the atmosphere was so electric that whole show. But just to see Malenko and Benoit against Taz and Sabu, that's probably one of my favorite matches of Taz's.
Joel, what about you? Do you have a favorite Taz match?
I'm more focused around how he changed from a Tasmaniac who couldn't speak English to being a heel, being a baby face, being a tweener, just all the different many faces of Taz. So as somebody who's outside the ring, I appreciate everything he did, and he always stepped up to the plate. And when it was really, really, when push came to shove, so you talk about stuff, him and Sabu, him and Shane, him and Bigelow, all that stuff was great. But for me, I like his promos. I like that we had the hottest gimmick in wrestling and we were the number 3 company. I like that, to me, we had the hottest gimmick and it wasn't a baby face or a heel. By my metric, it was a tweener. And that was great because maybe the next person, if not the second next person after he left to be a tweener in ECW, I think arguably was me. Because here you've got me going from being with the Dudleys and then kind of turning, but not turning all the way babyface because I'm hosting with Joey Styles. He's got to be the babyface. I'm still doing my same exact gimmick with the sexual limericks and everything else. So not to make this about me, because it's not. It's about Taz. But as an outside the ring talent, that's what I looked at in Taz, is the development of him with his outside the ring. And I thought, again, that for him only being in ECW for about 6 or 7 years, it was incredible everything he was able to do in that 300 episodes of TV. Just unbelievable.
What did you think of Taz as a commentator? That comes from David McClay. What do you think, Joel, Taz as a commentator?
Like I said, I like him. We watch Dynamite. I enjoy him. I think, again, he's unique. I think he's different. I'm a fan.
And we got a little sneak peek of Taz the commentator, that we knew on SmackDown in ECW when he was, repackaged as Taz. There was a match on ECW TV where Joey Styles and a Pete Cernercia were calling commentary on a match. And who's this guy, Pete Cernercia? And he's, cracking wise and calling this and that and other thing. And then, Joey Styles is there with the mic saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, the match I was calling with Pete Cernercia, but Pete Cernercia is a man as Taz." And as they pan out, it's Taz with the jacket, the B-boy pose, the hat, the thing of chew in his lip. And, and that was the debut of the new MMA version of Taz, Pete Cernercia. And we got a little bit of that, his commentary style with Joey Styles was what we later on went to see on SmackDown all those years.
This comes from Seed 17. What was the Taz move Meanie and or Studley McStudlerson, excuse me for mispronouncing your name, least enjoyed taking? What was the move you least enjoyed taking, Meanie?
It's Studley McStudlerson.
Studley McStudlerson. There we are. See, I always know you as from your gimmick name, Joel Gertner. So, but when we were talking about what's on your driver's license, I'm not used to pronouncing that. So,
or in our text log for this show, the three of us, where you're like, "Yo, asshole."
I don't know what you're talking about. Meanie, is there a move that you did not like taking from Taz?
No, all of Taz's suplexes were smooth as silk. There's a moment in, I want to say, Louisiana. I forget which town, but there was a match between the BWO and the FBI, and Taz comes out and suplexes everybody. And right before the thing, we're in the locker room, and Taz comes up to me and goes, "Meanie, a lot of boys don't think I could suplex you." Sorry. He had the dip in his mouth. He's like, "No, brother, the boys don't think I could suplex you." I was like, "Taz, I do a moonsault. I do a backflip off the top rope. I can get up for you. Trust me." And he suplexed me to the point where I was like, "Man, there's my dick." He just fucking he folded me like an accordion. I was like, "Hey, there you are, friend. How you been? Goodbye." And so and then later on, we also did a spot up in New England, very similar spot where I got him to do the meanie dance, and the locker room was sold out on that. And I was like, "Come on, Taz dance." And he does a little, and I do it. And then he hooks me and does the same suplex. So the only thing that might have been a little bit rough from Taz, we did a gimmick in, I want to say, it's right outside. It was like at a flea market, farmer's market, right outside Philly. I can't think of the name of the town. But the BWO came out, Van Dam and Taz were in the ring wrestling in the BWO. And then this is on ECW Hardcore TV, and it was shot on fan cam. We interrupted, did our whole thing. And then there's a moment where they flash forward towards the end of the show, and me and Stevie are looking at the curtain like, haha. And Taz comes up and smacks the shit out of me.
Oh.
"Don't you ever interrupt my match." And I'm just like, and I went from being Meanie to being Brian, in that moment, as planned. But that smack, I was like, holy shit. And we did like 3 takes of that. I was like,
oh man,
is this a rib? I was like, do I have heat with somebody? But if
Joel,
anything, all his moves are smooth,
Joel, did you ever take any suplexes from him?
I did. I took, twice. I think I took the Katsahajime, and I think I took a T-bone Tazplex. Smooth. I fared better. Thankfully I didn't get slapped, at least not by Taz, at least not on that day. But just the choke and T-bone Tazplex, and Taz told me exactly what to do, and he guided me through it, and it was good. I'm sure I was a little bit of a lead ass for him on the T-bone Tazplex. I'm sure probably he had a worse time of it than I did. Because probably wound up doing more of the work than he should have, and me less. But no, they were fine.
We'll do the last question here from Lenny Bacon. Not sure what he's baking. How much of Taz's early success would you credit to Paul Heyman? Do you think any other promoter could have positioned him as well? So I guess we'll ignore the Taz maniac part or whatever, but I guess how much would you credit the MMA style, that Taz, the Human Suplex Machine, to Paul Heyman? And do you think that somebody else would have been able to bring that out of him, Meanie?
Well, I think, just like George Martin was a producer on the Beatles albums, there was a collaboration between the two. There was definitely talent there. Taz was the talent. Taz had a great mind for the business. And in a lot of ways, Paul Heyman guided the ship. And much like with Paul Heyman, he allowed a lot of the talent to come up with their own ideas. And then it was Paul's idea to either present it to him and put it on television, or taking the information from the talent and then repackage it and put a little bit of a bow on top and then, send it off onto television. But Paul was the genius, that allowed us to have creative freedom, and which he allowed Taz to have creative freedom. And Taz came up with a lot of his own stuff, and it was up to Paul to present it on television and in that MTV style way of, those ECW shows were presented. But it was definitely a collaboration, whether it's Tommy Dreamer, Sandman, Raven. He allowed everybody, even including a Taz, to have that creative freedom.
Well, it looks as though we've lost Joel Gertner. That last question offended him, and he decided to leave. Hey, anything can happen on this show. But wait, I think we've got Joel back. Well, Joel Gertner is back just in time for us to say goodbye. That is it for us here on That Was Extreme. Thank you to adfreeshows.com for hosting us. Make sure to follow us on social media at That Was Extreme, and individually as well. They are at Blue Meanie BWO, at Stud Muffin Says, and I am at So Says Shernoff. Don't forget to check out our podcast. Joel's is the 69-minute Eargasm, and of course, you can find myself and Meanie every Monday on the Mind of the Meanie podcast and in video form starting March 8th on Fight.tv. For the ever-disappearing Joel Gertner and the Blue Meanie, I'm Josh Shernoff. We will see you again April 1st as we remember more moments from a time that was extreme.